Please turn in your Bibles to Acts chapter 4. We'll begin this morning with our New Testament reading. Acts chapter 4. If you're using a pew Bible, that will be on page 1160. God sending his Spirit to inspire Luke to give us a careful record of how the gospel expanded throughout the ancient world. As Peter and John were speaking to the people, the priests and captain of the temple and the Sadducees came upon them, greatly annoyed because they were teaching the people and proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection from the dead. And they arrested them and put them in custody until the next day, for it was already evening. But many of those who heard the word believed, and the number of the men came to about 5,000. On the next day, their rulers and elders and scribes gathered together in Jerusalem with Annas the high priest and Caiaphas and John and Alexander and all who were of the high priestly family. And when they had set them in their midst, they inquired, "By what power or by what name did you do this?" That is, heal the crippled man. Then Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them, "Rulers of the people and elders, if we are being examined today concerning a good deed done to a crippled man, by what means this man has been healed, let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him this man is standing before you well. This Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which has become the cornerstone. And there is salvation in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved." Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated common men, they were astonished. And they recognized that they had been with Jesus. But seeing the man who was healed standing beside them, they had nothing to say in opposition. But when they commanded them to leave the council, they conferred with one another, saying, "What shall we do with these men? For that a notable sign has been performed through them is evident to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and we cannot deny it. But in order that it may spread no further among the people, let us warn them to speak no more to anyone in this name." So they called them and charged them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered them, "Whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, you must judge. For we cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard." And when they had further threatened them, they let them go, finding no way to punish them because of the people, for all were praising God for what had happened. For the man on whom this sign of healing was performed was more than 40 years old. When they were released, they went to their friends and reported what the chief priests and the elders had said to them. And when they heard it, they lifted their voices together to God and said, "Sovereign Lord, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and everything in them, who through the mouth of our father David, your servant, said by the Holy Spirit, why did the Gentiles rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his anointed. For truly in this city there were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your plan had predestined to take place. And now, Lord, look upon their threats and grant to your servants to continue to speak your word with all boldness, while you stretch out your hand to heal, and signs and wonders are performed through the name of your holy servant Jesus. And when they had prayed, the place in which they were gathered together was shaken, and they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and continued to speak the word of God with boldness. Thus far, our New Testament lesson. Please turn in your Bibles to Psalm 2. Psalm 2. As the scripture observed in Acts 4, these words were inspired by the Holy Spirit himself. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, "Let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us." He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, "As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, 'You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel.' Now therefore, O kings, be wise. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him." Thus far, the reading of God's word. Let's pray together. Thank you, Father, for giving to us the Psalms, a means to express how the truths of God affect our lives. Please open our eyes this morning to see more clearly what you're teaching here and to learn how we might more effectively digest our faith and express it and live it. Help us to see Jesus. Open our ears to hear the truth that he has for us this day. May the words of my mouth and may the thoughts of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Do you ever feel discouraged that the moral universe around us seems to be crumbling, falling apart, imploding? That what you believe is under continual siege? That no matter how hard you try to live your life in a way pleasing to God, forces greater than yourselves seem determined to frustrate your every effort? In countries like Afghanistan, North Korea, and Somalia, a Christian profession can be a death sentence. In China and in Eritrea and Iran, a prison sentence. And even here, more and more in the United States, there is increasing antagonism to public displays and expressions of faith. Verbalizing and expressing the Christian faith encounters increasing antagonism, charges of hatred and bigotry. Holding to a biblical view of marriage, of gender, of sexuality can lead even to loss of employment or the loss of parental supervision of your children by the state or by large corporations. How do you process these things as a believer in God and in Jesus as his Son? How are we to think about what's going on all around us? The Christian faith is more than doctrine to be affirmed and believed. It is a life to be experienced and emotions to be processed and expressed. And it is the book of Psalms in particular that teaches us how to bring all these things together to guide us. Rather than prose accounts and affirmations, they give us poetic illusions and expressions to come to grips with the deepest emotions of the human heart, whether joys or triumphs, whether loss or sorrows. Now, Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 of the collection of 150 psalms serve as the introduction or gateway to the rest of the psalms. We began to think about this last time as we looked at Psalm 1 and the blessedness of communion with God, particularly through his word and his instruction, and the two ways to approach God, either in delighting in him or promoting oneself, the two ways. Today we turn our attention to Psalm 2. Now, in reading Psalm 2, it's important for us to see it both in its introductory role to the rest of the Psalms, as well as the integrity of its own unique message for us. Now, Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 do seem to be strategically placed at the very beginning of the collection of the Psalms, as a joint introduction, as it were, to the whole book. As poetry, both provide a good introduction to the form of poetry with allusion and metaphor, parallelism and contrast, and a common structure used throughout the Psalms called chiasm, which is named from the Greek letter chi, which is shaped as an X. And in chiasm, what you have is a series of ideas which are presented and then in mirror image are traced backwards. So, for example, in Psalm 2 itself, it begins with a picture on earth in stanza 1. In stanza 2, it shifts to heaven with a picture of God. In stanza 3, it remains in heaven by looking at God's anointed. And in stanza 4, it comes back to earth. So it goes up like this and then comes down like that, an X. And what is particular to that form is that at certain times, the focus is on the pivot point where it shifts going the other direction. And sometimes it also emphasizes what are on the outer edges of the chiasm. Now, thematically, these two psalms introduce much of what follows in the Psalms in terms of its content. Psalm 1 stressed the blessedness of communion with God, particularly through his word of instruction, showing two possible ways of approaching God. The second psalm expands beyond that first psalm from the individual communing with God to encompass the nations, emphasizing that communion with God is not just through His Word personally, but through the person of God's anointed Son that God has appointed to reconcile us to Himself. In this way, the door is open to the life of faith, both individually and collectively, through the Word and through the anointed King, in the light of whatever may happen in our life and experiences. Furthermore, these two psalms do seem to be deliberately connected. Both of them are unusual for the psalms in that rather than being prayers to God, they are affirmations and declarations about truths of God. Psalm 1 begins with the word blessed. Interestingly, Psalm 2 ends with the word blessed. Blessed are those, all who take refuge in Him. These two blessings, as it were, encompassing all that is between them as bookends. Furthermore, Psalm 1 speaks of the blessed man meditating on God's law, using the word Haggah, which means murmur or mutter. And when you kind of murmur to yourself and talk aloud to yourself, reflecting perhaps the scripture that you have memorized or you're reading aloud, you murmur to yourself. Interestingly, that same word is used not of the man rejoicing in God, but of the people opposed to God, when in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "Why do the peoples plot in vain?" That word plot is the same Haggah, muttering, except their muttering is not to delight in God, it is to join together and to oppose God. But the same word is used, showing the two different ways of using that one word by the one follower of God and the one in opposition to God. Neither psalm has a title. Not all psalms do. But it is significant to note that in the first collection of psalms within the Psalms, there are 5 collections or 5 books. The first, book 1, encompassing Psalm 1 to 41, there are only 4 psalms that lack a title, and every other title is in reference to David. Psalm 33 lacks a title, and it's not altogether clear why. Though with all the other psalms around it being to David, it's assumed that he wrote it. Psalm 10 lacks a title, but Psalm 10 is often understood to be the second half of Psalm 9 that for some reason has been divided apart. And there are structural indicators that they may in fact have been joined together. And then you have Psalm 1 and 2 that neither one has a title, and with the lack of a title, it makes it much easier to see them as a comprehensive whole. There isn't that title dividing the one from the other. It's interesting in Acts 13:33, where it speaks of the second psalm. God has fulfilled to us, their children, by raising Jesus, as it also is written in the second psalm, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." A couple of the earliest manuscripts actually say the first psalm, as though it saw Psalm 2 as part of Psalm 1. Psalm 2 shows an intensification, building on Psalm 1. Psalm 1 has 6 verses. Psalm 2 has 12 verses. Psalm 1 focuses on the individual, while Psalm 2 looks more globally at the whole earth. In all these ways, Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 present us with an entryway into the full range of emotions and experiences of the people of God living before God in a fallen world. And how do we do that, especially internally? Well, the Psalms, they show us how to do that. They guide us in putting up with disappointments and handling our joys, in dealing with persecution. Now, in looking more particularly today at Psalm 2, a psalm that is frequently quoted in the New Testament, it is identified as the Psalm of David in Acts 4, as we read earlier. And in its focus on the anointed king of the Lord, relies heavily upon God's covenant with David in 2 Samuel 7, that God would establish an everlasting kingdom through one of David's sons, whom God would regard as his son. The psalm regards the world as in rebellion against God and addresses this rebellion through that chiastic arrangement of its 4 stanzas, beginning and ending on earth, the center focusing in heaven. And through this, God reveals to us that the only hope for reconciliation and communion with God is through his anointed Son. We see first that the world's rebellious antagonism to God. The world's rebellious antagonism to God. The world is in rebellion against God. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. Since sin has entered this world through Adam, rebellion against God is a basic fact of life. It should not be a surprise. It should not confuse or trouble us, though often the evil in this world and the specific rebellion against God does trouble us. It grieves us that so many seem so focused on fencing off the Christian faith into small corners and not allowing exceptions for religious convictions any more place in society at large. From the moment when Adam and Eve took the tree in the garden to the time of Noah, the world just has seemed to be filled with rebellion and with violence. In the time of Abraham and Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, through the time of the exile of Israel from the land, the period of the judges where the nation began to disintegrate so soon after being constituted as the people of God, to the persecutions after Christ in Acts 8 when the church was driven across the empire and the rebellion of the Roman emperors against Christianity, and through on during the time of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation and the kind of violence that we see around the world today against those who hold to faith. The world's rebellious antagonism to God should not surprise us, and yet often it does. Perhaps because here in the United States we've had a period of time where there was not so much direct antagonism. But as we look how this antagonism is described, we see, first of all, the deliberateness of the antagonism. It's not just accidental. Why do the nations rage? Do the peoples plot in vain? there is this deliberation, this plotting together, this counseling together to oppose God. And we also see the determination of the rebellious. We see that the kings of the earth set themselves, the rulers take counsel, they take their stand against the Lord and against his anointed. They set themselves up deliberately, and they have determination that they are opposed to God and his ways. This is not mere political posturing, but an earnest commitment to prevail against God and show that they are greater. Much as at the Tower of Babel, when the peoples gathered together and they were going to show God who was who, when they raised a tower themselves from earth to heaven. So people today continue to oppose the Lord. We see furthermore the depravity of the rebellious in verse 3. Let us burst their bonds apart, cast away their cords from us. They view God as an evil slaveholder, as one to be run from, as one to be fought against, rather than as the holy God, our Creator, who made us for his glory. We see the degree of this rebellion at the end of verse 2. It is against the Lord and against his anointed one. Not only God, but his anointed one. The reference here to King David as God's representative, which ultimately points more fully to Christ, as the apostles recorded in Acts chapter 4, recognizing that Herod and Pilate and the Gentiles and the Jewish leaders were focused against Christ in fulfillment of this psalm. Indeed, it even encompasses believers today. In 1 John 2:20, John writes, "You have been anointed by the Holy One, and you all have knowledge." We do have knowledge of Christ by his grace as his word has been revealed to us. And so that opposition turns not just to the leaders, but to the people as well. As you see this kind of deliberate and determined and depraved antagonism to such a degree, one might almost think that somehow the writer of the psalm had an early look at 21st century American newspapers or social media for the kind of antagonism. But in the midst of it all, fifthly, we see the denseness of the rebellious. In verse 1, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? It's all in vain. All this anger, all this hatred, all this antagonism to God, it is completely futile from the start. Humanity cannot oppose God, our Creator. And yet so many try. So many try. We live in a rebellious world, antagonistic to God, and it can be discouraging. We might wonder, how are we going to get by? What's going to happen to our children and our grandchildren? If children are going to be removed from parental control because the parents wish to decide how they are to understand themselves and their nature as boys and girls, rather than let the state and some so-called expert decide what they shall be. But remember, it's futile. It shall not ultimately succeed, even as rebellious as it is. And it's at this point that the psalmist raises our eyes away from the earth and puts them on heaven, where we need to keep them. Here we see God's regal attitude to the world. The world's rebelliously antagonistic, but we see in response a regal attitude from God. Verse 4, he who sits in the heavens laughs. God holds them, the Lord holds them in derision. God laughs. He's not intimidated by the anger of mankind, the rebellion of his creatures. He is the sovereign Lord, and he knows it. He's not afraid of people. He knows who he is. You know, this picture here of God laughing. Those of you that are parents, I think you know what you're talking about. Your kids decide to act out, and they put up a fuss, and it's utterly ridiculous. And you want them to know that what they're doing is wrong. But it's so ridiculous, you start to laugh. Of course, that doesn't help in trying to discipline the child and help them to see the seriousness of what it is. But that's what God does to us. Our fierce rebellion against him, God laughs. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. God is not intimidated because of who he is. He's enthroned in heaven. Verse 4, he who sits in the heavens laughs. He's not a fellow creature. He is God in heaven. It's also because of how he is. Verse 5, then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury. He is the sovereign Lord. He is the sovereign judge. And he does not tolerate forever the rebellion of his creatures. He does have wrath, and he will terrify in his fury. But also, he's not intimidated because of what he has done. In verse 6, he says, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. He's appointed his own champion to confront the wicked of the world. He has appointed and set his king on Zion, his holy hill. And it's an emphatic I. As for me, I have set my king. You can grumble and complain and yell and scream, but I've set my king on my holy hill. That answers it. Not much more needs to be said. God has set his anointed one. And it is at this point, you see, that it shifts to another view of heaven, not where God is laughing and speaking, but where the anointed one begins to speak. And so the whole movement of this psalm pivots around God's anointed one. He is the answer to the world. He is the focus here. God's appointed ruler of the world. God has appointed his son to overturn this rebellion. In verse 7, this is the son speaking now. I will tell of the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. A decree. It means a fixed, absolute determination, carved in stone, as it were. And this is what God has carved in stone, that his anointed is his son, and that God has put him and regarded him in that role. Now, verse 7 here is reflecting God's promise to David in 2 Samuel 7. In 2 Samuel 7, in the middle of verse 11, he says, God speaking, I will give you rest from all your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And this thought of God's promise to David, his covenant with David. David would not build him the big throne that he thought would impress God. God will bring a son through David that God would appoint and that God would anoint. And this finds its fulfillment in Christ. In Acts 13:33. Where Paul says, we bring you the good news that what God promised to the fathers, this he has fulfilled to us, their children, by raising Jesus, as it is also written in the second psalm, you are my son, today I have begotten you. And similarly in Romans 1, chapter 4, it is the resurrection of Christ that clearly defines and marks him as God's anointed son. Romans 1, beginning with verse 2, God promised the gospel of God beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scripture concerning his Son, who was descended from David according to the flesh and was declared to be the Son of God in power according to the Spirit of holiness by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. Notice God's special relationship to his anointed one. This is the same anointed one in verse 2. Against the Lord and his anointed, God now has anointed this son. And he speaks of him as a son. Now, whether the psalmist fully understood it in terms of the unique son Jesus, clearly it intimates a special relationship between the promise to David of the king who would come and God himself. And now in the New Testament period, when the angel came to Mary and said that she would bear a son who would be the Son of the Most High God. And when God at the baptism of Jesus spoke, and he said, this is my son, whom I love. And at the Mount of Transfiguration, God again tells the disciples, this is the Son whom I love. They more and more come to recognize that Jesus is the Son who will oppose the rebellion on earth. We see furthermore God's special promise to this anointed one. He says in verse 8, ask of me and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. Ask of me. This reflects what the Lord came to Solomon, who many believe to be the promised son, and he said, ask of me whatever you want. And here he says, ask of me, I will make the nations your heritage. The very peoples that are in rebellion, they will all come and submit to you. In the Great Commission, when Jesus rose from the dead, before he rose up into heaven, he says, go, make disciples of all nations. All authority has been committed to me. And then in Philippians 2, we read that one day every knee shall bow in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God. God has promised the world to his anointed. And God's special task for his anointed. In verse 9, you shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. You shall break them. He has a rod of iron. Dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. The book of Revelation quotes this 3 times, picturing the second coming of Christ to destroy all the enemies of God. His task is to triumph and prevail over the sinful world. God's appointed ruler of the world is this anointed one that we now know today to be Jesus. And that should encourage us. His task, his promise, his relationship. Whatever forces there are around us that distress us, that discourage us, that harm people we know and love, the Son is greater still. The Son is greater still. And then it shifts now back to earth. Earth where it began with people in rebellion. And now the word that tells us that the world's alone reconciliation with God is through the Son. Verse 11 and 12. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. Your only hope is to embrace the anointed Son God has promised through David. As the stanza focuses back on earth, now it offers a glimmer of hope. To the rebellious king, God offers a gracious warning. It's amazing. God could have just ended it right there. This folly, I don't need to put up with this. I created this world not to talk back to me, not to self-destruct. Indeed, you'll remember that God said to Moses, hey, we can start all over again. Moses pleaded for the people. But God offers a gracious warning in 3 parts. First of all, he says, serve the Lord with fear. Serve the Lord, not yourselves. The word to serve means basically become slaves and vassals to this Lord. You need to submit entirely to him. He says to serve with fear. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We're told both in a later psalm as well as in Proverbs chapter 1. But serve the Lord with fear. Don't be fighting him, but rather serve him. Then he goes on to say, rejoice with trembling. Kind of an oxymoron, rejoicing and trembling. And yet, despite God's wrath, there's still hope for joy. But it only comes by recognizing your own folly at opposing God. It's foolish to oppose God. It's foolish. God laughs. But then climactically, kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way. Kiss the Son. Now, in our day and age, a kiss tends to have more romantic aspect to it, but in days gone by, a kiss was a sign of homage and submission. For example, in 1 Samuel 10, verse 1, we read that Samuel took the flask of oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him and said to him, "Has not the Lord anointed you as prince over his people?" What Samuel did in kissing Saul was to acknowledge that God had indeed anointed him, and that he, as the prophet of God's people, was humbling himself and submitting himself to Saul, and so should the people as well. In 1 Kings 19, verse 18, we read, "The Lord says, I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all knees that have not bowed to Baal, every mouth that has not kissed him." To kiss Baal is to bow the knee to Baal. It's to submit to Baal. So when he says, kiss the Son, it means submit to the anointed that God has provided. Recognize that God has provided your help in the midst of a fallen world where there is so much danger and so much evil. God offers grace, not automatic destruction. But his grace does not extend forever, because over against God's gracious warning is God's certain judgment. In the middle of verse 12, "Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled." We must not take God's grace for granted. We must realize that the Son that God sent in love to this world is also the Lord to whom we need to submit. There is no middle ground. Whoever is not with Christ is against Christ. Whoever is against Christ is not with him. God's judgment of mankind is certain. And we know this ultimately because his judgment was certain in his Son at the cross, as Jesus died for sins of God's people at the cross. But he doesn't end on the note of judgment. He ends with that encouraging benediction. Blessed. Blessednesses, it's plural again. May the blessednesses come upon all who take refuge in him. The world's only hope, your only hope, is to take refuge in Jesus. To look not to yourself and what pitiable strength you might think that you can summon to oppose those that would stand against you, but to take refuge in Christ. Derek Kidner observes, "There is no refuge from him. There is only refuge in him." God is not mocked. The Son will one day come as judge. He will use his rod of iron and strike the earth. It's found in Revelation 12 and in Revelation 19. God will bring his judgment. Dear friends, do not let the rebellion and hostility of the world distress you. It's easy to become distressed by the violence and the harsh language, the mockery that is aimed more and more at Christian people. But also, do not let the rebellion of your own hearts overtake you and lead you to a place of opposing God. Kiss the Son. Recognize that in Jesus, God's promised anointed one of David's house has come into the world to rule the world. The world may be growing in rebellious antagonism against the Lord and against his Christ, but God's regal attitude to the world shows no intimidation. God is not frightened. God is not undone. Jesus is God's appointed and anointed ruler, and our only hope for peace and reconciliation with God is through Jesus. If you've never bowed your knee before King Jesus, today, friends, is a day. Jesus is the Son that God declared. It is God's decree that Christ and Christ alone would be our only hope in this sinful world. Today you need to put your trust in him. Jesus died for sin. He rose from death for our salvation so that you might live for him, that you might submit to him and find your joy and purpose in him. Believe and receive his grace with joy and with glory. Now, for you who've put your trust in Christ, now is the time for us who believe to show the world that we really do believe, that we cannot be intimidated by the hatred and anger of the world. We do not need to be afraid. We do not need to respond in kind. Jesus said, in the world you will have tribulation. If they hated me, they will hate you. But he said, take heart, for I have overcome the world. Jesus has overcome the world. The world may threaten us. It may belittle us, abuse us. It may kill us. But it cannot destroy us. Because blessed are all who take refuge in Christ. Amen. Let's pray. Oh Lord, it is true that there are times when we become fearful at the increasing anger around us. We worry for ourselves, for our families, for others. Life can seem so unfair. Help us to remember that you are not intimidated, that whatever schemes, whatever anger, whatever cruelty the world might offer, it's all folly to you. You laugh. You can't take it seriously. You are the sovereign Lord. Help us to remember that. Help us to find our refuge in Christ. May we find his blessing. May we discover the wonders of his grace. That the weight is not upon us to prove that we are worthy of your love, but rather all there is for us to do is to receive a love that you have given in your Son. And we thank you for that love. And we thank you for that ultimate protection as we take our refuge in him. That one day there will be only blessedness for us. No more tears, no more sorrows, no more crying, but only joy in the presence of our living God. We pray to you through Jesus, your Son. Amen. Our hymn of commitment this morning is number 314. Oh, wherefore do the nations rage?